but you also have another tool for fixing bad labels called DoubtLab.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, do you want to tell us about that one?
Yeah, so the origin story of that one is pretty funny too. A couple of years ago, a year ago actually, I used to work at a company called Raza, and they built chatbots. And I noticed something interesting in the base example that we had at Raza. Like you have to imagine, a part of what Raza does is a classification problem where text goes in, and we got to figure out what the intent of the user is at that point in time. So, like, if I say hello, the intent is to greet, and if I say goodbye, the intent is to say goodbye. But then we had this one example in the base tutorial that was good afternoon, and that one was pretty interesting because it was listed both as an example for hello and as an example for goodbye. And if you think
Mm.
about language, right, that makes complete sense because I need to, like, if I say at the beginning of the conversation, then it's a different intent than at the end. But just from the text itself, you cannot really guess that very well.
I
And then I
watched
started, yeah,
over Christmas. I was watching this really dumb, but pretty fun musical comedy based on A Christmas Carol. So Dickens' Christmas Carol. It's starring Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds. I can't remember what the movie's called, but that's enough detail that you can find it if you really want to. And in one of the musical numbers, it's the name of the musical number must be "Good Afternoon,"
okay,
and the whole point of that is another use case other than just hello and goodbye.
yep.
But this one it was supposed to be like an insult. That's kind of the main point of this song. It was like, "There's good afternoon to you, sir." It's like a is
Oh, rather like
they
kind of a
make it,
snarky sarcasm thing.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I
Uh,
don't know,
so, so
that was the highlight of the film, I'd say.
so sarcasm, I think, is also like in general like a really good example of something that can totally mess up like any sentiment data set. By the way, um, but like for all of these like examples, the one thing I did notice is like, hey, I kind of want to have an automated tool that can find me these examples where we need to be a little bit careful because if you have the same text across two classes, that's going to confuse any algorithm that follows. Like that's we gotta. I don't. It's not necessarily like I know what the best practice would be at that point, but I kind of want to have a system that can just say, once every half year or so, all the new data that came in, can we just find examples? We just got to check again. Um, and then you start thinking like, okay, what are some techniques that allow you to do this? And techniques aren't necessarily very complex. Like assuming you have a classifier, you can just say when the classifier is super sure, but it's making a prediction for the wrong class according to the label, all right, something weird's happening. I don't know what yet, but like that's an interesting example to check. If an example comes in, but another algorithm says it's an outlier, all right, it's also kind of weird. Suppose an example comes in and the algorithm's just super unsure. All right, that's also a reason to doubt it. Suppose I've got like a very complex model and a very simple model, and they disagree on this one example. Okay, it doesn't have to be wrong immediately, but okay, that's another reason to maybe doubt what's happening there. And that's kind of how the name of DoubtLab came to be. I was just looking for just some heuristics and some tricks where, given some data set and some models you trained on it, we can just come up with a couple of reasons to doubt the example at hand. And the way it just kind of works is when multiple flags for doubt fire off at the same time, you can start prioritizing those examples for your annotation. So there's also like a little link with Prodigy there. If you go to the YouTube channel for Explosion, you'll see a demo of me how to apply these techniques for a text data set. But that was the pitch, and that was kind of the thing I was going for. And once I made that tool, I was also thinking like, hey, maybe I need to try this out and these techniques out on a couple of data sets. And then very quickly you learn that a lot of these like standard benchmark data sets have tons of label errors. There's a website called labelerrors.com,
Hmm.
and like there's a research project around that. There's another tool behind that called CleanLab. Has slightly different assumptions, but also a tool that helps you find bad labels. But they did some research and they estimated like the Google Quick Draw data set has like on average 10% label error. The Amazon Sentiment data set has on average 2% label error. The paper's a good read, but the main lesson I have from that is like, oh man, like all those algorithms that like improve the state of the art for like 0.5%, they might be overfitting on like the subset that's badly labeled. That's a dangerous
Mm.
thing. We need to have more tools for this. Oh my god! So that's how I created DoubtLab. It's basically just kind of scratching my own itch. Um, And again, like I want to be a little bit careful that I don't suggest it's a bad label per se, because usually, you kind of want to have a good meeting on the goal of of the algorithm, and that usually helps inform whether or not a label is actually bad. But I think I like the word doubt there. Like there are reasons to doubt something, and this library just tries to make that easy. And there's a couple of like really cool tricks that you could do here as well. Like you can have a like the docs also have this one example where I just built two models and they use different embeddings under the hood. So there's one model that uses byte pair embeddings. Um, and the way that that works is they have like subword embeddings. And the moment that you have like very long sentences, I try to average all the word embeddings. So information gets lost on very long sentences. But if you have very short sentences, a lot of context still remains. And then I have a bag of words model, which on some data sets has like the opposite effect. The more words there are, the more context the bag of word model kind of has. And then when you throw it into DoubtLab, you kind of find out that both models have a different sniff test for bad labels, so to say. So there's lots of like really cool tricks that you could do in this domain by using different embedding models. I also wrote a couple of libraries like Embetter that helped me sort of just swap out a couple of embedding models in scikit-learn pipelines. But a lot of this stuff revolves around me trying to scratch my own itch, and I like to do that in public. But DoubtLab has been getting some traction and some love, which is great. But I do want to emphasize it's not necessarily a super fancy trick that I'm doing. It's also kind of my style. I really try to prefer like a whole bunch of simple things before I move on to the complex thing. And 9 times out of 10, the simple trick tends to work pretty well. But there are also like plenty of examples where you need something more complex, but I like to have tools that allow me to try the simple thing first, keeping the human in the loop and all that.